The original Evil Dead released in the United States back on April 15th, 1983, after its original release in 1981. 30 years later, the Evil Dead reimagining is released on April 5th, 2013. Now 10 years later, it's April 2023, and we've got a new Evil Dead film to talk about. And oh, I'm ready. So Evil Dead Rise is the brand new film in the horror franchise, and the first since 2013's Evil Dead, which I just reviewed. You should totally check it out after this. This time written and directed by Lee Cronin. The movie follows Beth, a guitar technician who visits her sister Ellie and her 3 kids in their apartment complex. As the kids are returning from going on a quick pizza run, an earthquake hits the apartment building and creates a giant hole on the ground in the parking lot. As one of the kids goes down to investigate, he discovers many artifacts. Among them, he finds some old vinyls and a mysterious book. As this opening sequence was starting, I felt myself getting pretty excited, because I couldn't help but think about the opening sequence from the previous Evil Dead film, and just how incredible it was. And I really had a feeling that this one was gonna live up to it, and it very much does. Definitely not gonna give too much away, especially so soon, but every second of this opening sequence was strangely perfect, with stylistic shots, an incredible setting that offered some really nice cinematography, and a very sweet taste of this movie's overall tone. Now, I was already enjoying so much right away, but then this movie slaps you with one of the coolest and most creative title cards I've seen in a long time. Now, the primary characters and even some surrounding characters, who are all Ellie's neighbors, are introduced fairly quickly, but in many ways that feels necessary, because it lays down the groundwork first. We really don't need a long time to meet these characters. We aren't going on a journey with them. We already know why they're here and what purpose they'll eventually serve. Cut out the unwanted bits and establish what needs to be established right away. That way we can move forward to the good stuff without wasting too much time. I appreciated this movie doing so. Now, this movie plays on a familiar scenario, because if you're familiar with Evil Dead, then you know that opening the book and reading what's in it out loud is what awakens the malevolent force. This movie plays out that scenario, but in a much different way. First off, the book itself isn't chained up. What's keeping it closed are these weird sharp teeth on its side. And as it's opened, certain things play out a little differently. It isn't exactly easy as just simply reading whatever is in the book, but it isn't so far off left either that it's difficult to understand what's going on. The malevolent force is awakened in a different way, but in a way that's still creative and simple, and just as effective. And as you know by now, once that force reaches its first host, it's taking over in a violent way. Now, the sequence of the primary character becoming possessed isn't as disturbing as the way it was done in the last film, but it's still just as violent and painful. Now, the way they went about it, of course, was different, but in many ways still incorporated that shock factor you'd expect. And this almost feels unnecessary to say, but once this movie picks up, you know it's not going to hold back. And I love that this movie on every end tries to do different things and plays on certain scenarios in a new way. But I gotta say, I appreciate how much this movie still sticks to the Evil Dead formula without feeling saturated. You already know this movie's gonna be gory and disturbing. But while the last Evil Dead film leaned a little more into terrifying shock factor, this movie definitely does carry a similar tone, but in many ways leans a little more into its violence. Not to say the last movie wasn't violent, because it absolutely was, but this movie simply chose to lean into that a little more. It felt familiar but new, kind of like Scream 6. Familiar, but definitely its own thing. There's a part of a sequence in this movie that's shot through the peephole of the apartment door.
Open up now.
And like many things in this movie, it's just incredibly creative. As I was watching it, I actually said out loud, "That is so sick." And I was sitting alone. So yeah, lots of fun for me. And that's just something this movie does well. It takes a formula that is simply great and plays on that and finds ways to keep you entertained. Horror, even at its creepiest, can still be fun. In fact, at its creepiest is when this movie is its most fun. Incredibly violent, with many creative kills, tons of shocking yet intriguing imagery, a tone that feels familiar but so fresh, and enough gore to last a lifetime. Now, I said in my Renfield review that there was one scene that contained so much blood. No, forget that. There's not one but many scenes in this movie that makes the blood in Renfield look like a few drops in comparison. If you're an Evil Dead fan, this movie will meet every expectation. If you're a horror fan, this movie will scratch that itch. And if you're just a casual moviegoer, this movie will still entertain you. It does more than enough on every end. Now, you should know by now that I am an absolute sucker for these kinds of films. And being the Evil Dead fan that I am absolutely biased and unashamed. This is all subjective for a reason, which is why Evil Dead Rise gets a 9.5 out of 10. How would you rank Evil Dead Rise? Let me know down below. And remember, your time truly is appreciated here. And as always, I'll catch you on the next one.
You're all going to die tonight.